Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. For today's video, I've decided to be a bit different with my Valentine's Day recommendations. I was planning on recommending romances that I'd enjoyed and great ships, and then I was kind of going through on Goodreads and I realised that there aren't actually really that many romances that I've read that I've enjoyed a lot, and it's just not a genre that I read a lot of. So I thought instead I would go against the grain and I would recommend YA books that have little to no romance in them. So for all of you people who are fed up with romance recommendations being shoved down your throats, you'll get something different recommended for you today. Hope that you enjoy this video. Also, I'm sorry that I'm wearing a Christmas jumper, but it's absolutely freezing cold and it's snowing, so it doesn't really feel like it's Valentine's Day on Sunday, and I thought, why not try and bring Christmas back to life for a little bit, because I still haven't been back to work since Christmas, so it kind of feels like it could still be the holiday season. So without further ado, here are just over 10 recommendations for books that don't have a lot of romance in them. I'll start with one of my favourite UK YA books of all time, which is Beautiful Broken Things by Sarah Barnard. This follows 3 girls, and it's very much about female friendship, and it's a very empowering read about mental health struggles and the way that your friends can help you through those. I will be honest, I read this in one day when I was very, very ill, and I can't remember too much about it, so it is one that I want to reread, because Sarah Barnard actually released a sequel to this one called Fierce Fragile Hearts last year. Possibly 2019? 2020 is kind of non-existent in my mind. So I'm not quite sure whether it was 2019 or 2020, but it was a recent release. And I'm looking forward to getting more from these characters, but I do think I'm going to need to give this one a reread. But I can remember that there wasn't much romance in here because it was so focused on the friendship elements. The next book I'd like to recommend is Winter Girls by Laurie Hulse Anderson. Now this one is about a girl with an eating disorder, so if you are triggered by any kind of eating disorders, any kind of representation of dieting, calorie counting, things like that, it's not going to be the book for you. But it's a very honest portrayal, and it's a very harrowing portrayal of the way that anorexia can affect people's lives. This is again quite focused on female friendship, because the 2 main characters in this one, it's a girl whose best friend has just died, and she is coming to terms with her grief while also still struggling with her eating disorder. But it is quite intensely focused on their friendship and the way that it impacts her. There is a little bit of almost romance in here, but it's not very thoroughly explored, and it is one of the subplots, so I don't think that it would be off-putting if you weren't interested in any kind of romantic aspects. The next 2 books that I'd like to recommend are both by Alice Oseman. The first one of these is Radio Silence. This is following a girl who is obsessed with this podcast online. She does lots of fan art for it, and she then discovers that she actually knows who the creator of the podcast is, like, in her real life. So it's kind of like a mystery of who the podcast creator is and how they know about her fan art. But it's also a novel that is quite strongly centred around friendship. Also, one of the characters in this one, I'm not sure if they're asexual on the page or if they are implied to be asexual, but that means that, again, a very minimal amount of romantic elements in this one. And I'd also like to recommend Loveless by Alice Oseman. This actually follows an explicitly asexual character. There are kind of semi-romantic aspects, because she is of the mind of like, oh, well, maybe I haven't fallen in love and felt attracted to somebody because I just haven't met the right person yet. So she is forcing herself to try to find someone who will give her these feelings, and then she kind of comes to the realisation that she might be asexual and she might not have sexual feelings or romantic feelings towards people in the same way that most people do. So again, this one's got like a minimum amount of romantic aspects, because obviously she's trying to find a romance, but she doesn't have one. So if you like kind of romantic books that are about a character who really wants to find their love story, but then you're not convinced when they find that love, and you wish that it kind of focuses on them discovering themselves a bit more, then this will be a good one for you. I'd also like to recommend Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this is a book about 2 sisters who don't know their sisters. They have the same dad, they're half-sisters, but he's kept each of them secret from the other. So he lives most of his life in New York, but then he kind of goes out to the Dominican Republic where he sees his other family, and he is killed in a plane crash, and then they both discover that their dad had secrets that they didn't know about. This one's written in verse, so it's a very, very quick read, and also Elizabeth Acevedo's writing is absolutely beautiful, so I highly recommend it if you haven't read her before. And if you're not a fan of verse, or if you haven't tried verse before, I think this is a great place to start, because the characterization in both characters is just astounding. You would think it was a fully fleshed out novel because of how well you get to know both characters. And the same with the settings. The difference between the Dominican Republic and the New York setting is very fleshed out, and you get to learn a lot about the differences between the cultures. So again, definitely one that I would recommend. And I don't remember there being any romantic aspects in this one, but I think it's so intensely focused on the sister aspects and the family and like the meaning of family, and whether it is blood or whether it is kind of the people around you. The focus is very much on that, so I can't remember if there's a romance, but I'm putting this on here because of that, because if there is a romance, it's not a very prominent one. I'd also like to recommend After the Fire by Will Hill. I've just realised I have a copy of this somewhere, and I probably should have lifted it down. After the Fire by Will Hill. Now, this is a book about a cult, and I've said in the past that I always like reading cult books, but they never impress me. This is like the exception to the rule. This is a cult book, but it is amazing. So it's set after this cult has been, like, it's kind of collapsed, and after there has been, surprisingly, a fire, and you're following a girl, I think her name, Moonbeam, I was going to say Echo, one of those days, apparently my brain isn't working, but you follow a girl called Moonbeam as she is interviewed about what went on in this cult, and she shares the experiences that she had in the cult and the way that she's now feeling after the fire and after everything has happened, and how she is kind of coming to terms with what she's been through, because obviously it's a cult, it's been quite harrowing, it's been a very strict environment, she's been very controlled, and this is kind of the first experience that she is having with the outside world. It is such a fascinating read, and despite the fact that it's so thick, you can read it so quickly, because especially where it's got the two timelines and you're jumping backwards and forwards, the pacing is incredible. Again, this is one that there's semi-romantic aspects, because she kind of develops feelings for someone, but it doesn't really go anywhere, and you'll see the reason for that. But it's one of those books that's so intensely focused on the experience of the cult and on the way that she feels about it all, that the romantic aspect is very, very minimal and in the background. I'd also like to recommend Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is another verse novel, a very, very quick one again. Hey guy's brother gets killed, and he decides that he's going to take revenge, and he gets into the elevator, and on each floor the story introduces another character from his past, and they kind of share their experiences with gang violence, their experiences with gun crime, and the way that they feel about it. Most of them are ghosts, so it's people that he has lost in his past. I'm not sure if all of them are, but again, very, very minimal romantic aspects, because it's so focused on the experience of gang violence and the way that it can impact families so horrendously. This is one of Sean's favourite books, and it's very, very impactful. We read this one in one sitting, and it made us so excited to read more of Jason Reynolds' writing in the future, because it's just amazing how deeply this makes you feel, despite the fact that it's such a quick read, and it's verse again, so it is very to the point, it's very straightforward, there's no floaty language, and all of the characters are still managed to be so fleshed out, because it's just written so well. I'd also like to recommend A Dark Shade of Magic by Victoria Schwab. This is one that it might have romance later in the series, because I've still only read the first book, but if you're interested in starting a series with minimal romance that might then develop, it's certainly one that would appeal to you. So this follows a girl called Lila and a boy called Kel, and Kel has the power to like jump through these different versions of London. So there's Red London, White London, Grey London and Black London, and White London is like evil. Grey London is our London because it doesn't have any magic. Red London is Kel's London, and the Black London is the Dead London. I think I'm remembering that right. But he has to like do errands for different people going through these worlds, and when he's in our version of London, he meets Lila and she ends up hopping with him, even though she shouldn't because she's not an Antari, and it's just a case of what's going to happen there. She's in a different world and he's got lots going on, and there's like a big bad that he has to work out. He's meant to be working for them, but he wants to work against them, so there's a lot of political intrigue in this one, and it's definitely a series that I'm interested in continuing. I've got a feeling there's going to end up being a romance between Kel and Lila, because they do work very well together. There's a lot of chemistry there, but as far as I can remember, there's only like one kiss in this book. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But yes, it's definitely one that I would think has a lot of minimal romantic aspects again. And along that line, I've also got a few other books that are the first book in a series that it doesn't have a lot of romance in the first one, but it might have later on. So it's kind of slow burn and it might take its time to get there, but you might enjoy it. And those are Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, which follows a girl called Lyra and her demon Pantalaimon as they travel across this version of England and go towards the north, and they're trying to... There's a lot going on in these. It's hard to summarise it without giving spoilers because basically everything seems to become relevant later in the series. But if you haven't heard of the book, you'll have heard of the BBC adaptation, so this is one that I would recommend. There is a bit of romantic brought in book 2 that carries on into book 3, but there are no romantic aspects in book 1. You've then got A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, which follows a girl called Pip as she reopens a closed case in her hometown because she doesn't think that the police have found the right culprit. And there is, again, some romance bubbling throughout this one, but the case is definitely the priority and investigating the murder is where the focus is. So the romantic aspects don't become very prominent until right at the end of the book and then throughout the sequel. The third book has recently been announced, so I'm assuming that the romantic aspects will also continue through that one, but again, this one doesn't have much in for a first book. And I would also recommend, of course, Red Rising by P.S. Brown, because it's my favourite book of all time. Of course, I'm going to try and shoehorn it in here somewhere. But this is a book that is fueled by romance, because there's a boy called Darrow, and his wife gets killed, and he decides to rebel against the society that has led to her death, and to, like, take down the leaders that have caused her to be killed. Again, there's not much romance in this one. There is right at the beginning, because that's when Eo's still alive, and there is later in the series when Darrow moves on with somebody else, but the majority of it is very much fueled by the action. There's a lot of murder, it's very grotesque at points, can be quite a difficult read, but definitely one that is minimal on the romance until probably halfway through, 3/4 of the way through the second book, I think, maybe the third one. It's hard to remember off the top of my head, but yes, very minimal in the first one. And I'd also like to recommend Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is one where there's a romance that starts in the second book, but it's characters that meet in the first book, so there is a bit of chemistry going on in here, but this one has an amazing magic system, and the world is just so well fleshed out, and if you like P.S. Brown, you'll love Robert Jackson Bennett's writing because it's very sardonic and sarcastic. It's got the same quick wit that you find in Red Rising, and vice versa. If you've loved Foundry Side and you haven't read Red Rising yet, do that, because they work really well together, so I had to recommend both of them today. But this is definitely a series that I'm looking forward to continuing when the third book is eventually announced and released. And last but by no means least, I'd like to recommend Game Changer by Neal Shusterman. This is a standalone novel and it's Neal Shusterman's most recent release. It's about a boy, he gets a head injury during football and he thinks he's just got a concussion because everything starts to feel a bit weird, but then he realises he's actually slipped into an alternate universe. So the entire world has changed around him. And then he hits his head at the next football game and it all changes again. So in a couple of the universes that he finds himself in, Ashley is in romantic relationships because he is a different version of himself in each world. So some of them have relationships, some of them don't. But again, the romantic aspects are very minimal throughout this book and it's very much focused on the sci-fi and the physics elements. So it is one that might appeal to you if you're looking for non-romance focused YA. And those are all the books that I've got to recommend for you today. So considering most people think that YA, I mean, some of these like Foundry Side and Red Rising are kind of crossover between YA and adult, but considering most people think that YA is solely focused on romance and it's always got a couple in it and they're always kissing at really inappropriate times in the middle of a revolution, not all YA books do that. And I hope that if you are somebody who, like me, doesn't read a lot of romance, that you will be able to find at least one or two recommendations in here that will help you to find more books to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching this video. We post new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, so if you pop back in a couple of days we'll have some more recommendations up for you, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like if you did, leave a comment down below if you have any other books that you would recommend that are YA that don't have a lot of romance in them, because I'm always looking for more recommendations like this, and we'll see you in a couple of days. Bye! This is somewhere and I probably should have lifted it down. Bear with me. After the fire